Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and welcome back. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast. My name's Michael Barth, and this is Owner Stories. It's Tuesday, one of the days of the week that you guys always enjoy. I always get so much feedback from the Owner Stories episodes. I think it's because we all follow a similar path. We all have similar thoughts, and I don't know. It's kind of good to know that you know we're not just the only one. We all have these crazy Porsche obsessions. We're not crazy. We have these Porsche obsessions. Today I have Stewart coming in. Stewart's coming in from Australia, another Aussie. Stewart's going to join me very shortly by Zoom. As you guys know, who've listened to previous episodes of Owner Stories, these are all done via Zoom. Primarily because I'm in sunny, well, I should say raining London today. Do them by Zoom. Most of the times the audio is okay. I hope there's not too many issues during the podcast. Sometimes the internet will break out, but most of the times it's okay. Or break down, I should say, or break down, break out, stop working. How about just stop working? Anyway, let's get on with it. I'm going to get Stewart. He's going to come on. He's got a pretty cool 911. And he's got a few other cars which aren't Porsches, which we'll chat about as well. So let me get Stewart on the line. Let me get Stewart through Zoom, and let's start talking about his PorscheCooled Owner's Story. Welcome back, everyone. Like I said, welcome back to Owner's Stories what number was it? 40. You're number 40. So today I'm joined by Stewart, and Stewart is a fellow Aussie. He's coming in from Australia. He's coming in from Melbourne. Good morning or good evening, Stewart. How are you?
Good evening, Michael. Good, thank you.
Thanks for taking the time today, this evening, I should say, in Australia and coming on the podcast.
No, that's all right. I've really enjoyed it as I've recently found it and, appreciate you doing it for us.
Yeah, I get a lot of messages actually about people who have only just found it. Some people tell me that they start from number one, and I said probably best not to start from number one. It wasn't my best work, but some people like to start from the beginning, and I know a lot of other people just sort of go through all the owner stories because they just want to hear everyone's journey for their first Porsche or their second Porsche. So let's get straight into it. And everyone knows who listens to this episode every week is we always like to start at the same point. Like with Porsche, when did it all sort of start for you? Was it a childhood thing where your father had a Porsche or your neighbor had a Porsche or you just used to see them in the streets around Melbourne? Or did this happen, much later in life, your Porsche journey?
Yeah, so for me, it happened later in life. I mean, I was aware of the brand and, I'm showing my age here a little bit. I think my first real exposure to Porsche was playing Need for Speed Porsche Unlimited, which was a computer game in the early 2000s, which I absolutely loved because I loved evolution mode where you'd play through from the 356 to the 996 turbo and race on some of Europe's best tracks. And you could go through and put hop-up bits on your car, and I suppose I really got a appreciation for the brand and its history through that game. But in my early life, we grew up, comfortable but not particularly wealthy, and having a Porsche was just not on my horizon. I couldn't have imagined it ever happening for me.
Okay, so when you start searching for that, we all get our license for the first time. We all start searching for our first car. Did you start off with practical type cars because you needed them for work or commuting, or did you still want to get something that was a little bit special when you bought your first car?
Yeah, so my first car is quite strange. So my first car was a 74 Ford Transit, which had actually been my grandfather's. So he bought that in 76. He was a grandfather clock repairer. And
okay.
When he stopped driving, the Transit was available and it needed quite a bit of work, but it was a perfectly serviceable car and it made sense for camping and towing the boat and that kind of thing. So I got that actually when I was about 15. And with the help of my dad and my brother, I fixed that up and got that on the road for my first car.
So that's quite a sentimental car for you then. Is that a car that you'll always hold on to? It's not something you never get rid of?
No, I will always hold on to that.
And you've had that since you were, 15 you said?
15, yeah. But wow. I remember being like a 5-year-old kid and carrying my car seat over to put it in and go for a ride with Granddad. So
really?
Certainly,
that's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that that one will be staying around.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so you've got the Ford Transit. That's the car. You fix it up. You're driving it. It's got the memories of your grandfather and your your youth, so to speak, or it's being a kid. What comes next? You've still got the Transit. We know that. You haven't got rid of it. What happens next?
Yeah, so I had always been sort of into Aussie muscle cars. Were always quite attractive, and when I was just after I'd gotten the Transit, I started saving up for a GT Falcon. So, when I first started saving, a sort of late 60s GT Falcon was on my agenda. And in the time that I was saving up, the prices probably went from 20,000 to 60,000. So that was very unrealistic, which led me into we'll call it the lesser model, the XB GT, so the early mid 70s. So I worked really hard as a welder while I was studying, and picked that up when I was 19.
Yeah, and for the international listeners, these are sort of cars like the GT Falcon, 70s Falcons. These are sort of cars that when people say, did you see Porsches when you were a kid growing up? No, I didn't see Porsches. I saw Falcons, I saw Holdens. And the special cars were like the GT, like you have, Stewart, and also like the, when I was young in the country, it was like, I remember there was someone that had a Tirana GTR XU1, which was such a special car to see at the time. And so the listeners know, all these Australian muscle cars, they've actually gone crazy in price. Like some of those 70s and 60s Falcons are in the 200,000s, aren't they now? 200,000 odd?
Look, even more for the Bathurst specials. It's common for the homologation specials to change hands for between $500,000 and $750,000.
So that's another car that you probably aren't going to part with, are you?
No, I mean, again, though, mine is the lower model. It's only probably a $70,000 car today. But no, I absolutely love it, and I really enjoy driving it. So no, that'll also be staying around.
I know you say only 70,000, Stuart, but that's still a lot for those cars, considering what they used to sell for.
Of course. And I mean, it cost me a lot less than that when I bought it. And I was incredibly lucky. Like, with a little bit of help from my parents, I inched over that line before they kind of doubled in the next 12 months. So I was incredibly fortunate to get it when I did.
Okay, so there's a Ford trend here. You've got the Transit, inherited from your grandfather. You've got the GT. You're into Fords? You still like Fords?
Yeah, I do. I'm into anything with wheels, really. So my father's into vintage cars. So he had a DeSoto when I was growing up, a 1930 straight 8 DeSoto, which we did a lot of work on. So that's Chrysler, so Mopar.
Yeah.
It really just about anything that's a car I'm interested in.
All right, so you've got the Transit, you've got the GT. What do you start looking for next? Is this when the Porsche starts to come into the frame, or is there something else?
No, so that was what sort of came next into the frame. So I'd had the Falcon probably 5 or 6 years, and I'd got that sorted, and it was running well, and done a motor and all that sort of thing. And my brother brought to my attention, and the attention of a couple of other people who we'll cover in a minute, that the air-cooled 911s in the US were really quite a bargain. And in his usual sort of gruff fashion, he bought me the History of the 911 book for Christmas and kind of, handed it to me and said, "Come on, get it done." So
what comes next then? What comes after the GT?
Well, so the Porsche. So my
it does
my
come
911.
next.
Yes.
Oh, right. Okay, because I know there's another car in the mix, and I was thinking that was the one that came next. That comes later.
That came later, much later.
That comes later. All right, so we're talking 2015 or 2014, wasn't it? You said that you started looking for a car in the US?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd had my eye on it since about 2010, and I'd sort of been saving a little bit of money and starting to think about it, but things really got serious in 2014. So I had noticed the prices started to bump and thought, righto, I'd really better get onto this or it won't happen.
Yeah, and I think, your timing was perfect because, as we all know, the prices, even in the US, even 912s that I'm looking for and 911Ts and things like that, everything is going crazy now. And so the international listeners know, and I've said this many times in many other episodes, but for people in Australia, the benefit of getting it from the US is you can have a left-hand drive car in Australia, especially if it's over 30 years old. It's not like an issue. You can put it on heritage plates. It doesn't cost you much in registration, which a lot of people do. So it is quite a, there's shipping cost and whatever, but I want you to explain that a little bit later on. But tell me where did you start looking? We're going back a few years. Where did you start looking for this 911? And had you decided at that time what model you're actually looking for?
Yes. So I knew exactly what I wanted. So I'd read the history book my brother gave me, and I'd read a number of articles in Thoroughbred and Classic Cars and Classic and Sports Car, and really whittled it down. So what I wanted was a Carrera 3.2 coupe for a number of reasons. So Porsche introduced galvanizing to the bodies of 911s around 1977. So I wanted a car that was after that. That was obviously during the SC era, but I wanted the galvanized body. And I really wanted the Carrera 3.2 because it was the first 911 with modern fuel injection.
Okay, so yep, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And I had a few other bits and pieces I wanted. So the Carrera has hydraulic chain tensioners where the SC doesn't, and everybody needs to do the upgrade. And I also I wanted to do and still want to do a bit more motorsport.
Okay.
And the Carrera is supposed to be pretty good for that with basically a brake pad change. So where I went looking was the Pelican Parts Forum in the US. So two other friends had actually bought cars off the Pelican Parts Forum and brought them back to Australia before me.
Yeah, and there's some bargains. There are some bargains to be had on Pelican Parts Forum, and I think casting my mind back, Jack in the UK, who is Sunburnt Lobster, who's got the 911S. I can't remember the year he bought. I think he got his off Pelican Parts, and it was just there's some. I guess the thing is, you don't just look at all the common places to look. You have to look at the forums. You have to look. I know a lot of people get cars from Facebook who have reached out to me here in the UK who said they've found great cars on the Facebook marketplace and the eBay marketplace. So, did this car just appear on Pelican Parts, or it took a while to find it?
So the car actually wasn't advertised. So what I did was I went and published an ad in the wanted section, and I grabbed a copy to read for you. So I said, wanted to buy Carrera 3.2 coupe, looking for a good running car all years, interesting color preferred. I do not want white, black or red, please. And from there, the seller contacted me via a private message and said that he had an iris blue 85 Carrera 3.2 that he wanted to sell. So he had bought it to do a backdate on, but when he got it, he had a few other Porsches as well. And when he got it down to LA, he looked at it and said, look, this is a completely original 100,000 mile car in a good color. I just can't bring myself to chop it up and make it into a backdate. So therefore, I'm going to sell it and buy something that's more suitable for that.
Okay. Is that a special order color, iris blue? It's quite a rare color, isn't it?
It's a very rare color. I don't believe it is paint to sample. I believe it's on the catalog, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I saw the image that you sent me that a friend of yours took the photo of, wasn't it, on Instagram?
Yeah, correct.
And also the images that you sent me through Instagram as well. It's a great color. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's something nice about Carreras in those special colors. Like other people have been on Owner Stories who have got the, had the cassis red, and there's been some really great colors that have come through. So you speak to this seller, and what happens next? What do you do next?
Yeah, so I obviously had a couple of chats via private message. He sent me some photos which looked good. In the background of the photos, actually, I could see a new GT3 and a 993 convertible. Okay. And I think he was a fairly well-off gentleman. The cars were actually stored in a hangar with his private plane. So that, and then I got on the phone and had a good chat to him, and he seemed like a genuine sort of guy.
All right, so he's a collector, he's an enthusiast. He's obviously looked after the car. When you started to dig deeper with the paperwork, and is it matching numbers? Was there a lot of records on the car?
There were, but I didn't have them available to me. So, being who he was the CFO of a very large business, and he only had limited time to answer all my questions, which is why he wanted to sell via private message rather than go through the whole rigmarole of advertising and talking to 50 people. So I arranged to get a pre-purchase inspection done, but it was an on-site pre-purchase inspection, which is very common in America. They're probably $300 or $400, and there's agencies who have a local mechanic in most areas who will go around and do, really a pretty good inspection, a drive test, put like a paint thickness gauge over the car, check for any repairs. So he had the gentleman round to the hangar one morning, and he did that inspection for me.
So how did you find? Sorry, Stewart. How did you find this person? Did you find it through the forums, or did you get someone pass on this contact to you? How did you find this person to do the PPI that's reliable? It was literally the top search on Google when you look for pre-purchase inspections in America. Okay.
And we'd previously used the same company for a Chevy Nova that my brother had bought.
Okay.
So it was not a Porsche specialist, which in hindsight, and you'll see from where the story goes, was a mistake.
Right, not a Porsche specialist. So you're trusting that he has general mechanical knowledge, but not necessarily issues that happen with that model year or Porsches in general. So the guy goes to the hangar. He goes and checks out the car for you. How was the report when it came back?
Honestly, it was really good. It was just what I'd hoped for. So it was 300 photos. He took a jack with him, got the car up on a jack, gave me photos of everything.
Yes.
He took it for a drive. He did everything that you could expect and more from somebody who was doing the check on site.
And the results that came back were enough for you to make a deal on this car?
Yes. So I did also, as you would say, bought the seller, and he did say to me that he had compression and leak down done on the motor, and shared with me the results from a recent service. And the two together, trusting the seller and everything he's saying lining up with the pre-purchase inspection, I was happy with that.
Okay, so you've got the two great ticks. You've got trusting the seller. You've got the PPI. Everything seems to be in order. So then you make an offer on the car. But before we get there, just tell the listeners exactly what the car is. It's a 3.2 Carrera. What sort of options it had? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So it's a 1985 3.2 Carrera in iris blue with the blue leather trim. In terms of options, it had the 6 and 7 inch Fuchs wheels and an upgrade to an 8-way electrical passenger seat,
okay.
Cruise control, sports shock absorbers, the sunroof, and air conditioning.
And how was the general condition of the interior for an 85 car?
Yeah, really, really, really good. So it had 100,000 miles on the clock.
Okay.
And look, there's a couple of scuffs on the seat. The carpet's a little bit scrappy under the pedals, but really honestly, the Porsche quality after that many years really did hold up very well.
So how long did the previous gentleman own the car for?
So he hadn't had it very long. He'd only had it a couple of months, but the owner prior to him had it for 20 years. So I with my cars, I love to have their history and to work out their story. And frustratingly, I haven't been quite able to do that with this car. So I know it was sold new in California at Thousand Oaks at the Porsche dealership.
Yes.
Who don't have a record of who they sold it to.
Okay.
But I've caught up with it through some receipts with a gentleman up in Bellevue, Washington, who owned it for only a year or two and then sold it on to another gentleman. US listeners, if anybody knows a fellow called Scott Bowman up in Washington State, I would love to have a chat to him. He owned the car for 20 years.
So at the moment we're jumping forward a bit, but you're documenting every owner that owned the car. So you want to have that record.
I'd love to. And I'd really love to get a photo of it from the 80s or 90s. That's something I've got for my other cars, and I'd love to have it for this. But I think at this point, 5-6 years after getting the car and not succeeding, it's a bit of a pipe dream.
You never know. There's a lot of different people that listen to the podcast, and there's a lot of US listeners. Our US base is strong, so you never know. There could be someone out there that does notice this car and does remember this car. I've seen it happen before. So I just want to go back to the guy you bought it from before we get into the other details. The guy you bought it from only had it for 2 months. Was there a reason why he only had it for 2 months? Because usually it's a bit of a flag for some people. Oh, he's bought it.
Yeah.
Did he not like it? Did he make the wrong decision? Was there something wrong with it? What was the reasoning there?
For him, it was he bought it to do a backdate body chop and all that kind of thing on. And when he actually got his hands on it, he'd bought it sight unseen. Dare I say, I don't think money was a real issue for him.
Okay.
And then he got it, and I think he drove it 500 or 600 miles, and said, "Look, I just can't bring myself to do it to this car."
Okay, so that was the reason. You did say that before. Okay, so that's
Yes.
that's a good sign, though, isn't it? It means he does
It
respect
is.
the car, and he doesn't just want to bastardize the car or change the car from its original form because of the condition it's in. So that's a good thing to have. The car is a great car. So all right, so you get this PPI done. The car's in California. How do you work out how to get this car? Are you going to trust are you going to get a freight company to bring it back, or are you going to take a trip to the US? What do you do next, Stewart?
Yeah, well, so we actually took a trip to the US. So my brother Ross and I had been talking about going to the US for a long time. We'd never been. And it's sort of, we timed it in. So we said, well, if we're going to go to the US, we want to do a road trip for a few weeks. Why hire a car if you're going to buy a car in the US? Let's go over and drive it before we bring it home. So the way we made that happen was I got it popped in a warehouse. So Cars USA, or I think they're Classic Automobile Relocation Services, have a warehouse in Long Beach in California. So I had spoken to them and teed up to have the car stored there. And so he simply drove it down there one Saturday morning and handed the keys to those kind people and left it there. And that was in late January, and I was to go, or I went over in August to pick it up.
Okay, that's a lot of trust there, isn't it? There's still a lot of trust there because January to August is quite a long time.
Yes, it is. These people do have a very strong international reputation. And when you look at the cars they deliver every year to Pebble Beach and to Goodwood and that kind of thing, and it wasn't the cheapest way to store the car, but their reputation was strong enough that I was very comfortable with it.
Okay, so you've spent the money, you paid the seller takes it to the storage place, respectable storage center. When you go to the US, how was the car when you first laid eyes on it? Was it as you expected, or was there some more issues?
Yeah, a bit of both. So I first laid eyes on the car after 13 hours on an overnight flight.
Not good.
At least it wasn't Europe. It's much longer if you go to Europe. But so I'd never been to the States before. And what we actually did was on the way from the airport to the lockup where the car was, we stopped at the DMV to get the appropriate permit to allow us to drive it out of California. And that was a 4-hour wait in 30-degree temperatures. So I was pretty tired when I first got there, but it was exactly as I'd hoped. It was a very nice original car. It had a few stone chips and marks, all of which I'd known about. It was exactly as described, which was very pleasing. But when we got there, and we'd known, the storage people had told us the battery was dead. So the first thing that we did was pop the frunk open and got the battery out and borrowed a trolley from them and walked down to the local, I think it was O'Reilly's, where I had pre-ordered a battery and they had it waiting for me. And for any of our American listeners, 2 Australian gentlemen walking through Long Beach with a battery on a trolley, look, you stick out a little bit. It was
Yeah, I was going to say, Stuart, you should have had at least one night's sleep. You couldn't wait. You had to go straight there, right? You had to just do it there and then. Let me ask you a question before we go any further, though. How did you organize the insurance at the storage place? How did you make sure the car was covered? And did they provide the insurance when you pay them the fee, or how does that work?
Yeah, so while it's under their care, it's under their insurance. So they've got it covered.
Okay. So you go and get a battery. You take it back. You've gone to the DMV. What about the insurance side of it then, once you get the battery in the car and you're ready to drive it?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story in itself. So what we actually got from the DMV was a permit to drive the car, like in Victoria you get like a day permit or a take it to the roadworthy place type thing. Because if you register a car in California, you have to pay California sales tax, which is pretty vicious, about $3,000.
Right.
So I had paid $27,000 US for the car, and the tax would have been about $3,000. However, the seller had sort of pointed me in the direction of looking in another state, And I had discovered that Arizona have what they call a 90-day non-resident permit. So if you can prove that you're not a resident of, I think it's only of Arizona, but definitely another country counts, you can buy for $30 a permit to drive a car for 90 days. Once I had arranged that was how I would register it, I then spoke to Farmers Insurance. I can't remember how I got onto the guy. If anybody's ever interested, just hit me up and I'll share his details. And he had arranged through Farmers, which is one of the big brands in America, insurance for the car during the trip, which I think it cost me $120 US a week, which is quite expensive. But when you consider you're there for a 5-week trip, you say, hey, that's fine.
So that sort of insurance, and I'm trying to think about the ruling in the UK here because I've kind of looked into it, but not 100%. And it's about having an address in the UK. You can still get that insurance even though you don't have an address in the UK, the insurance? Is it traveller's insurance, is it?
No, he let me use the street address of the Farmers Insurance office as my address.
Oh, really? So they're quite reasonable then. They're quite helpful.
That being said, he had a copy. I had to do a driver history. He had a copy of my passport, my Australian driver's license. I wasn't getting away from anything if something had gone wrong.
Okay, so the car's fully insured. Everything's fine. You put the battery in. Is that when you've driven to Arizona already, or you're about to drive to Arizona?
No. We're in the warehouse. We've popped the battery in. We've got everything organised, and we started up for the first time. And kind of worryingly, it blew quite a bit of smoke in the warehouse. So air-cooled cars, when they sit for a long time, have been known, oil drains into the sump, out of the dry sump tank, and it can blow some smoke. So you sort of go, okay, look, this is probably fine. And we packed up all of our gear into the car and headed out into rush hour traffic in LA, which is legendary, as I think most people probably know.
Sorry, Stewart, is that the first time you've driven a left-hand drive car?
No. So
okay.
Ross, my brother, has a left-hand drive Chevy Nova.
Okay,
and I had actually only very briefly driven 2 left-hand drive 911s in Australia, probably for like 2 kilometres each before I went.
Because driving a left-hand drive car in the States or even in the Middle East, where I was, based in Bahrain, you really do have to unlearn everything you've learned before. Do you know what I mean? You really do, because you do slip up every now and again and you look the wrong way, or, it happens quite easily.
Even after 6,000 or 7,000 Ks, I still, one time at night, I remember looking the wrong way. And fortunately, Ross called me on it. He's like, you're about to do something stupid and you need to stop. But it's such a habit, as you say.
Yeah, it's even like reversing, Stewart. You you're so used to looking over one shoulder and you have to look over the other shoulder. You know what I mean? Like it's such a weird thing at first. You get used to it and it becomes sort of second nature again, but it does take a while to sort of adjust. All right, so what happens next?
So we head out into LA rush hour traffic. I haven't slept for 30 hours. And the transmission in the car was okay, but it was second gear was a bit crunchy. So I'm trying to work around a 915 with not great shifter bushings, damaged second gear synchro, which I had kind of knew about, and drive through LA rush hour traffic to get over to Venice Beach where we were staying. It was, obviously I'm elated to be driving my 911, but it was a pretty stressful drive.
Yeah, I was going to say, the memorable first drive in your first Porsche, your first 911, and you do it in peak hour LA traffic. So it's not ideal. And I'm guessing there's going to be a great drive that comes up that you want to share with the listeners when you actually did get the right feeling for the car and did actually get it all, everything came together. So you're in Venice. So you stay in Venice. You've got a garage. You've got a garage there for the car, of course, wherever you're staying. Or was it on the street?
No. So we street parked it, but it was in a nice part of town. There was plenty of other nice cars in the street.
So the synchro with the second gear and the blue smoke. The blue smoke goes away. That was just the sitting for 6 months. The battery's sorted. Does the gearing get any worse, or it's okay?
No, the gearbox is fine. I mean, in Australia, I actually drive a car regularly with a crash box with no synchros, so I can adjust the revs and double it down, and that's fine. I can deal with that. I hadn't really noticed any more smoke, but the next day we took it for a drive out to the Nether Cup Museum, which is a wonderful collection of mainly vintage cars and a beautiful, full marble museum, and that was great. And we thought, okay, well, we're in LA, Sunset Boulevard's got to be the thing, right? That and Mulholland Drive. So we popped onto Sunset Boulevard to head home, back to Venice, and it wasn't really running right, and it became a bit obvious that we were probably down a cylinder, and we stopped in. I might be getting the order of events a little jumbled because it is 6 years ago. We stopped in at the Getty Centre to go to the art museum, and while we were sitting in the queue to get in there was some more blue smoke of a pretty significant volume. So It's running a bit rough. We're blowing an embarrassing amount of smoke, and it's not. Yeah, I'm not yet having a heart attack, but I'm not super happy about it.
So the PPI didn't show anything wrong with
it. Did not.
Nothing at all.
No.
Okay.
No, and the gentleman had taken it for a drive, and the seller had been using it to commute to and from work for a little while, 20 or 30 miles, but then it had sat quite a while. So I jumped onto Pelican Parts and sort of asked for people's thoughts. And there were various different thoughts about what might be going on. A couple of guys said, look, it's a car that hasn't done many miles for a couple of years. Maybe the valve guide seals have hardened up a bit. What you should do is, one, drive it, and two, swap it over to this particular Brad Penn branded oil, which has got some additives in it that's really good for softening up seals that have gone hard.
Okay. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, so with that in mind, the next morning, firstly, it's running on 5 cylinders, which is intolerable and bad for it.
Yeah.
So the next morning, we jumped in the car, went round to O'Reilly Auto Parts, which is a very big automotive parts retailer in America, and I bought all of the tools I needed to change the plugs. I bought a set of plugs and I changed them in the car park, and the cylinder came straight back, but there was some oil on particularly number 3 and number 6.
Okay.
So I'd arranged to buy a case of the Brad Penn oil on the way out of town. So we had to head to Kingman in Arizona to collect our 90-day non-resident registration, which is on the way to Vegas. It's a little bit off the beaten track, but it's on the way. So I picked up a case of oil on the way, and I booked in at a workshop called Carl's Place in Vegas in 2 days' time to get an oil change and a filter change and get this special oil put in the car.
But were you comfortable driving it to Vegas? It's not a short drive.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, it had oil pressure. It was running well. It blew some smoke at idle, but once you were up and going, it was fine. I had no reason to think. I'm fairly mechanically handy. I had no reason to think that it would give us trouble.
Okay, so you get to Vegas. You take it to this specialist. How did it all pan out with him?
So they were great. The guy actually raced an SC, the fellow who owned the shop, and they did the oil change. And I said to him, look, it's been blowing some smoke. And in the 2 days they had the car, it didn't blow any smoke at all. It was golden. He took it for a drive. It seemed fine. They put this new special oil in it. And then, of course, as I go to start it up to leave the shop, cloud of smoke.
Really?
Oh, my God. So anyway, it is what it is. It's got fresh oil in it. Maybe with a few hot runs and this good oil, maybe it'll clear up, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
So we were heading to Mammoth Lakes next, which some of the US listeners would know takes you through Death Valley. So Death Valley is a place in the States which is it the hottest place in America? I'm not sure, but it's very hot and very dry.
And you're there in summer as well, aren't you? You're in August, so you're in summer.
And the air conditioning, of course, is not really functional. So it was a warm trip. I think the highest temperature we saw was 46.5 degrees Celsius.
Right.
We bought a couple of very big Gatorades to drink on that trip.
But doing the miles on the car, is it working its way out? Is it getting better? Is the blue smoke disappearing? Is the car feeling like it should?
Yeah, so the car feels fine, and the smoke has only ever been a problem at idle. So as soon as you're going, you don't notice there's no smoke behind the car, but we were monitoring the oil level pretty carefully. And really, once we got some miles on, we were using about a litre of oil every 600 miles, which is
I don't know if that's normal or not. Is that normal? Not really.
It is very far from normal.
Far from normal,
So
okay.
Yeah. So every tank of petrol, I had to put in a bottle of oil.
Okay, well, that's not good. Yeah, okay.
It was not good, but the car was running fine. It would do 80 miles an hour all day. It pulled well up hills. So I'm still on the horse of, look, perhaps this is going to come good. Perhaps it is just a valve guide seal issue. But by the time, so our next destination was Monterey to do the Pebble Beach, Concours week.
Okay.
By the time we got out there, it wasn't really getting any better. It was still blowing smoke, particularly if you idled in like the queue for a car park or something like that. It was a bit of a problem. It was a bit embarrassing. So while we were actually at the Quail, which is a really wonderful event on the Friday of the Pebble Beach event, I booked it into Don Wise Auto Works up in San Francisco for the next.
I've heard of that for some reason. I don't know where I've heard of that. I have heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, a recommendation from Pelican Parts and what from the forums. And what I had asked Don to do for me was I'd explained the problem, and he said, "Look, I'm very busy, but I will do a compression and leak down test for you, and I will pop the valve covers off and have a look."
Okay.
So,
yep.
We had the next couple of days of our holiday. We finished out Pebble Beach week, which was amazing. We went to an event there called the Works Reunion, where they have 1,500 Porsches in one place.
It's a fantastic thing to go to,
and it's free. Yeah. So, but I am slightly stressing under the surface all of the time. But still ecstatic that I've got this 911.
Yeah. Well, you're trying to have a relaxing trip, aren't you? You've gone and picked up your first 911. You want to just drive it and enjoy it. But, like all of these little things, they're all part of the story, aren't they? This is all part of the ownership and of this car that you've now owned for 5 years. So
Correct.
When you take it to Don Wise, is it? Does he get it sorted then? Does it all get sorted then, or is it still ongoing?
Sadly not. So I dropped it off at Don's in the morning, and we grabbed a rental car and went out to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, which is also, oh my God, amazing. But so I'm in the Computer History Museum, and I get this call from Don, and he said, "Look, I've got bad news for you. Okay. You have got worn valve guides, and you don't have much compression in cylinder number 3. And now that I've got the valve covers off, I can rock the valve around in the guide by hand." What we think had actually been happening, and I have no reason to doubt the seller. I don't believe that he actually did enough miles in the car to know.
Yep.
And I don't think the PPI guy missed anything. What we think was happening was the way the guide ended up being worn was that a lot of the time the valve would go straight up and down and keep the guide blocked, and there would be no oil. But every now and again it would get off center and rock sideways in that guide, and then you'd get an absolute jet of oil through at that time.
Right. So did he have time to fix it for you, or he still didn't have the time to fix it?
No. So Don said, "Look, I'm really busy. I can't do this job for a month."
Okay. So that's no good.
No, not really. So he said, "Look, where are you guys planning to head next?" What he offered to do was there's sort of a group of Porsche mechanics who all know each other through the industry. And he said, "Look, where are you heading next? Let me get you some phone numbers and make some calls and see if I know somebody who could help you." So we were heading to Portland, Oregon to stay with a friend of ours up there. And there were 2 shops in Portland, Oregon. So there's Mark Motors and there's Steve, a guy who I think it's Rensport is his workshop.
Okay.
So I had a chat to them both, and Mark Motors said, "Yes, we can make the time. We'll move stuff around and we can do it really quick because we're still on our holiday, right? We want the car to drive."
Yeah.
And Steve at Rensport said, "Look, I'm too busy." But the thing that he did for us that was amazing was he went to all of the local suppliers and machine shops in Portland and said, "When this job comes in from this guy Stewart from Mark Motors, you put it ahead of all my work because I know that he's on a once-in-a-lifetime trip and I want to see him get this trip done." So even though he didn't get any of the work, he gave my job priority at all the suppliers, which was just...
That's great.
So generous.
Yeah. Was there any point in time though, Stewart? I mean, you must be getting a little bit frustrated here with the car. Was there any point in time where you thought, shit, I'm just gonna send the car back to Melbourne now. I'm just gonna send it back to Australia and just do this trip in a rental car or something like that. Was there any point in time where you thought, I'm gonna do this?
There were many beers drunk and many discussions had along those lines, but we had a couple of other things going on. I was actually writing an article on the trip for 911 and Porsche World. So if I shipped the car home at that point, that article went away.
Okay.
And additionally, and it didn't pay a lot, but it paid a little bit, which was nice.
So what issue is that article in for the listeners so they can check it out?
I'll dig it up for you and I'll give it to you at the end of the podcast because I haven't got it off the top of my head.
Okay.
So the other thing was from where we were to get the car back to LA was probably $1,000 US of trucking.
Yes.
And the other thing is I work a pretty high pressure job and I knew that once it got back to Melbourne, I didn't have time to really look at it. So it would be many months until it was running again in Melbourne. So you sit there and you say, I'm not going to get paid for the article. It's going to cost me $1,000 to truck it back to LA. So I've already I will burn a couple of, and then I've got to hire a hire car for the rest of my holiday.
Yeah. And I would think as well, sorry for interrupting, I would think as well, like even no disrespect to Australian Porsche specialists, but there are so many great Porsche specialists in the US, you know what I mean? And getting that car fixed in the US, maybe cost-wise, maybe better. I don't know if it would be, but maybe it's slightly better than getting it fixed in Australia. Was that something that you were thinking about as well?
Look, a little bit. I was more on the practicalities and just the spending money, to hire a car, transport the car, and to miss out on the little payment from the article. It seemed like throwing good money after bad when I could have reallocated that into fixing the problem.
Okay, so you're getting it fixed. Once this is fixed by this other specialist, is everything sorted then? Can you then enjoy the car to its fullest?
Yeah, so there's a few more twists and turns, as there always is with this kind of a story. So we drove up from San Francisco to Portland, which is 1,000 kilometres. So we kept filling it with oil and drove it another 1,000 Ks. And when we got up there, the plan was that we would pull the top end off the motor and see what we found, because the other thing that could potentially be causing this is worn pistons and barrels, which, as I think a lot of 911 owners know, particularly recently, is about a $5,000 problem for new pistons and barrels and some more wait time. So I dropped it off at Mark Motors. The guys ripped into it that day. The next morning they called me and said, okay, this is a top-end rebuild. It's just the heads and the valve guides. The bores are savable. We will hone them. We will put new rings in, but we don't need new pistons, which was very pleasing because it was a huge cost. And so they set about doing a top-end rebuild, but they did not split the case and take the crankshaft out or do any of that stuff.
So what about the cost? You bought the car for $29,000, you said before, right? $29,000? $27,000. So do you want to share the cost of how much this cost you to get the car back up to speed, so to speak?
Yeah. So in the end, it was about another $11,500 US getting the top end rebuild done.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, we did do some while you're here things though. So like, for example, on the Carreras, the hard fuel line that is on them from the factory can tend to break and is only able to be changed when the engine's out. And that's a couple of $100. So we got that done. Another thing that we did was we did pull the barrels off and upgrade to turbo head studs because head studs are notorious for breaking. And if you upgrade to the turbo ones, you're then protected. We refaced the cams, we refaced the valves. We did a proper job, right? We didn't just bang it back together and, get it running for the trip. We did all of the things that ought to see this motor now run through to 300,000 miles.
Okay, that makes sense. So were you expecting a bill of $11,000 though, or were you expecting it to be a little bit less than that? Was that a shock? You had the money ready, you were ready for it?
No, but I had some money saved, which I was able to put my hands on at relatively short notice. Look, the guys at Mark Motors were really great. They gave me an expectation of what I was looking at, and they gave me a low and a high range before they even put a spanner on the car. And we did end up at the high end of the range. But every time they rang me and said, hey, we would normally do this, do you want it? I said, well, yeah, actually, I do want that.
So when they're checking it over, Stewart, do they check out the tyres and everything are okay? You don't need to replace the tyres, the suspension, the main parts of the suspension are okay? Everything's all right?
Yeah, we did put a set of front tyres on it because they were a little worn, which I had known about. But other than that, it checked out really well. And they had the car for 9 days, and I rented a car and went up and did another part of the trip while they had the car. And before they gave it back to me, they put 3 or 4 heat cycles on it and drove it about 100 miles. So they wanted to be very sure, given that I was going to take the car and drive it another couple of thousand miles and they would never see it again, that they had it on point before they gave it back to me, which I really did appreciate, even if it did take an extra day or two to get that level of certainty.
Okay, so you pick it up from Mark Motors. You're back on your journey through the US in your new to you 911. When
Correct.
You first started up, there's no more blue smoke, and everything goes okay after that?
Yeah, so we picked it up from Mark Motors in the pouring rain on a Friday night in peak hour.
You don't have much luck with that, do you? You always peak hour and always bad conditions.
Yeah, so we'd lost 9 days of a 5-week trip to this engine rebuild. So we're really on a mission now. Like Ross and I are going, right, we're going to drive as many good roads as we can between Portland and LA when we've got a fixed time booked for the car to go on the boat. So we left Mark Motors on the Friday night and we put 150 or 200 miles on it on the Friday night. And we're, running the rings in, because when you run in a new set of rings, you got to power on, power off, different speeds, heavy throttle up hills. And we stopped at this diner in the middle of nowhere and really went over the car before we had dinner. And it is spot on. Like it is running beautifully. It's pulling well. There's no smoke. The oil level is not changing, despite the fact that we're covering miles. And it was perfect.
So when you've finished the running in, and now you realise this is my first 911, you've gone through the hassle having to fix things, but at least everything's sorted. How was that first drive, though, when you first actually could let it out, drive it properly, and enjoy the experience?
Yeah, look, it was great. It was exactly what I had hoped the 911 would do. It steered well, it braked well. It was wonderful. And actually, I think the next day or the day after, we picked up what was our favourite road in the US. So there's a road that runs from a place called Yerka to Redding, via a town called Happy Camp. It's about a 250 mile road. And the way we found it was literally Ross sitting there on his phone going, that road looks twisty and it's paved. And to just do that 250 mile drive, and we took, swapped spots a few times, and, it's glorious and sunny and it's summer. And the car's running great, and there's no traffic, and the surface is good. It was really great.
Oh, that's great. So now it sinks in. You're with your brother. You're enjoying your first 911, and then it all makes sense. All that hassle beforehand all makes sense, and the car's sorted. So you enjoy driving it around the States for a few more weeks.
Correct.
How do you? Let's jump forward a little bit. How do you? Have you already pre-organized the shipping back to Australia, or do you do this during the trip when you're driving? How did you sort all that side of it out?
Sure. Yeah. So I had that organized before I left for America. So we used a company called Amaroz Shipping.
Okay.
So what the deal was that we would drive it down to their warehouse and drop it off, and that they would take it from there, put it on the boat, and bring it back to Australia.
Okay, so they looked after everything. They get the car prepped for Australia. Everything is done by them?
Yeah, I mean, I cleaned it before I took it to them. I took it to the car wash and gave it a really, really good scrub, particularly because in the back end of California, we went through a locust storm, which honestly, it was a vicious locust storm. So I had a lot to get off it. But yeah, they did everything for us. They were really good.
So that thing that I hear about when you import a car into Australia, does that happen at export from the US, or does it happen when it enters into Australia, where they have to completely clean all the undercarriage and get all the dirt off, etc.? That has to happen before it's shipped?
It can be both. So you clean it as well as you can before it leaves the States. But if Australian customs look at it and they're unhappy with it, they clean it themselves and charge you a little bit more, which I think from memory did happen with the Porsche, and it cost me an extra $500 or $600, which in the scheme of things is not a lot.
Okay. All right. So you've taken the car, you've done the trip through the US, you've had your memorable drive in the 911 in the US, you picked it up, a story you'll never forget, especially with your brother as well by your side. So then you ship the car and you come back to Australia. How long does it take before you see the car in Melbourne?
Yeah, so I dropped it off in America on the September the 11th, and I saw it in Melbourne mid-October. So 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay, that's quick.
Yeah, I think they had a boat. I think they had a boat that was loading the next day or the day after. It isn't always that fast.
Yeah, I was going to say it's normally a lot longer, isn't it? But I guess if you tie it up with the boat that's leaving, then that's good. Okay, so not that long. So it comes to Melbourne. It has to do the rounds through quarantine and through customs. Based on the cost of the car, was it about another 20% for importing the car or less?
I'd like to just tell you accurate figures, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So the shipping and the insurance while it was on the water cost me $4,000. And look, this is 5 years ago. It will have gone up a little.
Okay.
That cost me $4,000. I had to pay GST on the price of the car,
yes,
which is 10% of the car plus 10% of any cost you spent in the US. So it worked out to be about $3,700, I think they assessed it at in the end.
Okay.
And what else did I have to pay? I missed luxury car tax because it was under that threshold. Yeah, sorry, the shipping was $4,500. I've just grabbed the receipt here. So $4,500 for the shipping, and yeah, about $4,000 in GST.
Yeah, and so the listeners know, luxury car tax in Australia, if you're importing a car, even if it's 30 years old, and the price of the car converted to Australian dollars plus the shipping on top of that, is what they use as the luxury car tax amount. Correct, Stewart?
Yeah, that's right. And the threshold is currently $69,000. So for everything above $69,000, you pay a 33% luxury car tax on that value. So it's expensive. You know, if you buy a car that's $76,000, you go, yeah, whatever, it's a couple of $100. But if you buy a proper expensive car, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, if it's like 120,000 Australian dollars, it's quite a lot of money in luxury car tax, so it does bump it up.
It does.
I think the last time I did a calculation on some site, I think with the freight and everything on 120,000 Australian converted, I think it was about 30 grand or something on top.
It sounds about right.
Yeah. All right, so the cars, you get the car cleared. Let's skip all the paperwork side of it, but you get the car cleared. Were there any hiccups? Were there any delays in getting it through customs?
No, it was fine. I just caught the train out to a warehouse in Port Melbourne, and the guy handed me the keys, and I started it up and drove it home.
Okay, so the car's only been, off the road, so to speak, for shipping for like 5 weeks or something like that. Not very long.
Correct.
So really nothing could have happened to the car. The car should be fine. So when you go on the first drive in Melbourne, you have to obviously go and get it. It's already registered, or you go and put plates on it?
No. Well, it's a little harder than that. So the new rules for Victoria are if it's an American car that's not been registered in Australia before, you have to get it approved by an automotive engineer.
Okay.
So you take it to this gentleman who does an assessment for engineering requirements to check that it meets the Australian design rules of the year in which the car was manufactured. Okay. So in my case, I had to put right-hand drive headlights, so the headlights point in the correct direction. Yellow indicators, because in America they have red indicators. He checked that the seatbelts and the brake lines met Australian compliance standards. He did a noise test, and which I failed. And in the end, I had to argue the point with him because it had a standard exhaust. The mechanical noise from the rear engine actually breaches the Australian standards for noise level, but it always did, even when any Porsche was new, because the way the test is done is very hokey, if you will. It doesn't take into account that, the engine's down the back. But in the end, we had a discussion about that and worked around it. It was only a very slight thing that we had to work around. So I got my engineering certificate, and then I went down to Vic Roads with the paperwork to get my plates.
Okay, so that process that this specialist has done, you couldn't go to a Porsche dealer to do that? You couldn't go to, a Porsche network dealer or a Porsche specialist to do that?
No, it's a specialized automotive engineer who needs to do that. I'm sure that a Porsche dealer would broker the service for you, but it would end up with one of these specialist engineers.
Okay. All right. So you've got all those memories. You've got the car in Melbourne, Stewart. When do you get a chance to take it out on those beautiful Victorian roads?
Yeah. So ironically, I wasn't actually the first person to drive it really in Victoria. What? So I'd had it home. I'd had it home 3 weeks, and we were running a little rally. My brother and I, and a couple of gentlemen who we didn't really know from the Porsche Club had said they were going to come on this rally that we were running, and it was the first time we'd done it. And the night before the rally was supposed to start, that they rang me and said, "Look, our 3-litre Carrera has broken down in regional Victoria, and we can't come. Like, we've entered, but we haven't got a car." And I said to them, "Well, look, you seem like nice guys. You're Porsche people. So what I'll do, I'll bring the car along, and you guys can take it on this rally. And because otherwise you can't come, and that's terrible. And I'm organising it, and we didn't have many numbers, and I really wanted people to come." So in fact, they took it for its first drive through Victoria and over the Alps and around a couple of tracks and all of that.
So what was that? A Porsche rally, was it?
No, it's a rally called the 3-Day Trial, which I organised, but that's on a bit of a permanent hiatus at the moment.
Okay. The Instagram photo you sent me the link for, it said that you'd lent it out to a friend, and that was going to Hanger Banger, was it?
Yeah, that was a different friend.
That was a different friend.
It was.
Okay, so now the car's in Melbourne, though. You had all the work done in the US. Do you still want to take it to a specialist here and get it checked over again, or everything's okay?
No, I'm pretty happy with it. So there was some stuff that was wrong, but I do most of my own work on my cars. So I'm pretty happy that I know where it's at. After it had been here a little while, I still wasn't very happy with the gearbox. Second gear was still kind of crunchy. I had a drive of another friend's 75 that's got an 81 SC driveline in it, and my car really wasn't where it should be. So I dropped the motor out of the car and I pulled the gearbox off, and then I took the gearbox down to a Porsche specialist here in Melbourne, who ironically had done the Porsche factory training with the gentleman in the States who built my motor. So they actually knew each other.
Wow. What a small world.
Yeah. So I got the gearbox rebuilt, and when they were in there, they found that there was a bit of an issue with the diff as well. The engagement had changed so that it wasn't ideal. So we readjusted the diff at the same time. And I got the gearbox back from him, put a new clutch in it, and put the motor back in the car. And since then, I basically haven't laid a spanner on it other than to change the oil.
That's great. So everything is done. So it cost you $29,000 US, $27,000 US. Cost you $11,000 in Oregon, wasn't it?
Which is about 15 Australian. So
27,000. Yeah. So how much? And then the work you had done in Australia. So what was if you don't mind sharing it, what was the cost all up that you paid for the SC landed in Australia back in 2015?
Yeah. So landed in Australia was 44 plus the work. So probably about $60,000 on the road with a new engine and a new gearbox.
Okay, which is, for the international listeners, is a well-priced 3.2, isn't it?
It really is. And
even in 2015.
Even then. And look, even preparing for the podcast, because Michael and I were talking about it over Instagram, it is still realistic if you hunt in the right places on Pelican Parts or on maybe Hemmings. There's a few places to look where an Australian person could think that they could buy a car like mine and have it in Australia for between about $55,000 and $80,000. Like that is still realistic at the moment, even in the current crazy market.
Yeah, because, I mean, US is still the better price market to buy it. I mean, I've seen some reasonably okay 3.2s here for sale in the UK. I mean, one was a G50, and that's about £63,000. So they're still cheaper to get them from the US. What was I going to ask you?
So I've got an interesting piece of trivia for you. I looked into it because I was interested. During the entire 3.2 run, they delivered about 800 cars to Australia. During that same period, so 84 to 89, they delivered around 37,000 cars to the US. So
yeah, see, that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? That's why you search out the US. But I think that point you made, Stuart, just before about piston heads, how you found yours on piston heads or Pelican parts. Pelican
parts, yeah.
And then there's piston heads, here in the UK. I think those sort of places and other people, other owners that I've spoken to, US and in UK, it's getting these cars off market, getting these cars before they're advertised. Like you said, the guy that owned your car was, a busy guy. He was a CFO. He didn't want to advertise. He didn't want to mess around. People are time poor. So I think what you did was a really good thing to do, where you just put the ad out on Pelican Parts, and you got people coming to you saying, well, I've got this car. Are you interested? And I think that's still the way to do it. And, in Australia at the moment, talking to James at Porsche Platts at RSR Classics in Melbourne, all these cars are selling, off market. All the good cars, even in Australia, are selling off market. So I think you definitely did it in the right way, and also enjoyed it in the US, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And look, I really can't say enough nice things about the buying process. And honestly, even though I ended up with a car with problems, and my two other friends who bought US cars have had basically carefree running for many miles, I'm not really upset about it. I genuinely believe the seller did not know. And in hindsight, I would, he was a busy guy. He seemed fine. The records were there. But in hindsight, and for anyone else, get the car taken to a Porsche shop in the US. You need a compression test, you need a leak down test, and you need them to take the valve covers off and check you don't have a broken head stud. If I had done that, obviously I would have been able to negotiate a better price. But if you do that, you should not feel scared to do what I did.
So that's not a standard thing that a PPI being done in the US. That's not a standard thing that they do. They don't do the compression test.
For an air-cooled 50-50. For an air-cooled 50-50.
Well, you have to ask for it. Is that what it is? You have to actually specifically...
You should ask for it.
Right.
A Porsche shop would probably do it. My friend that bought an 88, his PPI did have that included at a Porsche shop. But yeah, that specific thing is what you should do.
Yeah, I think look. There's a lot of listeners who are looking for their first 911, and I know some people are a bit scared off air cooleds because air cooled prices obviously in Australia are way too high. Excuse me. SCs were actually okay. SCs, are not that high, but they're going up in Australia. Obviously, they're going up very quickly. But the fact that you could get a 3.2 Carrera, you know what I mean, and you can still get it at a reasonable price, and I think, like you said, the production numbers being so high, the cars are still out there. So I think, it's a good alternative to people looking for, very expensive now 996s, that maybe they should start looking at the States and start looking at maybe bringing in an air-cooled. Do you have any regrets you've driven old cars before, so you're used to them. Do you think the 3.2 Carrera is a good first Porsche for a non-Porsche owner?
Yeah, I do. The thing that one of the reasons I sorted out was that fuel injection. So it is a car where you put the key in it like a modern car. You turn the key, it runs, it looks after itself. Unlike a carbureted car, a CIS car like an SC, it's still got a hand throttle. It's still a bit hard to get going when it's cold. So yeah, I would have so my wife is not an old car person before she met me, and she has taken the car away for the weekend on her own a couple of times. And I'm not worried about getting the phone call. It won't start. It won't run. It's giving me trouble. They are pretty reliable and relatively easy to drive.
So is this the only Porsche that's going to be in your garage? You're used to this US importing, and you did it a while ago, but you know the process. Are you thinking maybe there's another one coming along, or would you get something else?
I would get something else. I, like you, have a Ferrari itch I would like to scratch, but it's a bit of a reach at the moment.
Well, yesterday I recorded another owner's story this week for this week's episode, actually. And the gentleman in New Zealand, he's got a Ferrari Dino. And I still think the Ferrari Dino GT4, talking of Ferraris, somehow really complements air-cooled, water-cooled Porsches. It just goes really well in the garage, and they're not that expensive. And I know a lot of Ferrari enthusiasts don't like them, but for me, I still think it's a nice looking Ferrari. That and the 328. But like you said, the prices are definitely going up on 328s. Dinos are okay.
Yeah. Look, for me, a Testarossa is what I've got my
Really?
on.
You're going top end there, Stuart.
I know.
5 years ago, you could have got a bargain on the Testarossa. They were very low, very low.
Look, this is a bit of a pipe dream at the moment. So it's honestly, in a way, the real trouble is finding one that's been driven enough, because everybody's got a Testarossa that's got 10, 20,000 miles on it, and the price is the same. And if you buy a 20,000 mile G50 Carrera, the price is insane. Finding a Testarossa that's done enough miles that I'm prepared to afford it.
So you'd buy a US car? You'd buy a US?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or
US,
UK car? Japan, yeah.
Less in US and Japan. And I'm really only at the start of that journey. And a few things would have to happen for that to become a reality for me. Like it's a real reach, and it's we'll see.
I don't even know the price. I mean, I watched a video on YouTube the other day, the guy that's based in London, TGE TV, and he just bought one from a dealer, which is on YouTube, which is worthwhile watching, but his is quite immaculate, and it's gone through the Ferrari program, Classiche, or whatever they call it, and it's got all the documentation. But I think he made the point in the video, and we're getting a bit off track here, but he made the point in the video that the prices were a little bit low at the moment on Testarossas. I don't know why. He said they were a bit down. But they're still very expensive, right? I mean, what's the cheapest one you could get in the US? Still a lot of money.
Cheapest one I've seen sell is 67 US.
Really?
67,000 US. Yeah, that was a high mileage car with a bit of scruffy paint, but I'd be fine with that.
Well, that's quite cheap.
Yeah, but like I say, so that is a pipe dream. The other thing that I kind of have in mind is, Kim said to me, a little while ago, well, if we're going to be a car family, which I think we are, I wouldn't mind having something for myself. And I have had my eye out for an early Boxster for her, which is realistically probably what will happen, even though I do have a Ferrari itch.
That's a good car as well, though. That's a good car to have in the stable, on the garage, that's for sure.
Great car. Yep.
Let me know how you go with the Ferrari itch. I'll be interested to know if you do pick up one. That's a pretty special car. That's for sure. It's a very, very special car.
It would be. And like I say, a very particular set of things have to happen, but I want to leave the door open for it.
And you'd have to do a lot of checks on that for sure, right? Because that can become very, very expensive. Very, very expensive.
Incredibly.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, Stuart, we're almost at the end of the podcast. I always like to finish the podcast with, and you've touched on your favorite road that you had driven your 911 in the States. In Melbourne or around Melbourne area, what's the favorite road you've been on in your 911, or the favorite road you'd like to drive on your 911, and you would recommend to the listeners if they ever take a visit to Australia and come to Victoria?
Yeah, so the one I'll give you, which the 911 has been on a few times, is Eildon-Jamison Road. So it's about 2 hours out of Melbourne. It's the road between Eildon and Jamison, sort of 60 Ks of really nice, fairly new, relatively unpopulated bitumen. That would be the one to hit, I think.
Fantastic. Have you ever driven in Europe? Have you been to Europe and driven the roads around there?
Yes, but not in anything good and not a lot. I mainly caught the train around Europe.
Yeah, next time when everything opens up again, the next thing I want to do is get one of those Porsche where you pick the car up from the factory and you can just take it for a day or 2 days. I mean, it's not cheap, but you can actually experience, and that's the newer Porsches, it's not the older Porsches, of course. But I think it'd be a nice experience too, even in a 992, 992 manual or Carrera S or Carrera would be a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah.
All right, Stuart, that's great. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners before we go?
Yeah, there's one more thing I'd like to add. So the other thing that's been really great since I got the car here is the Porsche community in Australia. And I would like to give a little shout out to the Classic Porsche Australia Facebook page, something I joined 4 or 5 years ago. But this year, two of the other guys and myself ran an event. It was their brainchild, and I ran the track day part of it for them, called Luftwasser up in Albury.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we had 172 Porsche sports cars and about 300 people at the event.
Do you know James at Porsche Platz, who's been on Owner Stories before?
I may have bumped into him, but I don't know him personally.
Yeah, because I think he told me about that. He was telling me about that event. I think he went there, I think, from memory.
He probably would have. So I ran the track day for that event, and honestly, I was so run off my feet getting the track day to happen that I barely said hello even to the other guys I was organising the event with. So I probably brushed past James and didn't even realise.
So you're fully immersed and you're fully immersed into the community. There's also Nick in Melbourne as well from Architect Driving, who's got the 991.1 Carrera, who's had SCs and 3.2s and GT3s. He does track days as well. So you're fully immersed into the Porsche community in Victoria. Then you're deep into it.
Correct. Yeah, and look, the thing I would say is the thing I love about the Porsche community is people drive their cars and actually take them to the track, which is very much along my line of thinking. I drive the car, I drive it to work. I put a seat cover on it and put the dog in it. I just love to see cars actually driven, and people seem to do that more with Porsches than with other makes.
Yeah, true. And you've done a few track days in the 3.2?
Yeah, so I've had it at Sandown the once with actually again off that Facebook page, the Classic Porsche Australia Facebook page. We had a Porsche class on a drive day, so 15 Porsches on track at one time. And we did that, and that was fun. And it's been to a couple of hill climbs and some sprints, and yeah, I want to do.
It handles well on the track.
It's great. I want to do more, but I have had a very busy last couple of years. I actually intended to do some tarmac rallying with the car when I first got it, but I've never quite gotten around to that. So hopefully in the next couple of years, I can get a half cage in and do a little bit of that.
Yeah, it'd be great to go to Tasmania and drive around there. That would be a good thing to do. I'd like to do that
really would.
In my 911. That'd be a great thing to do.
You should. I have been lucky enough to do it
in
the passenger seat of my... I haven't taken the 911. I went in the passenger seat of my brother's E-Type, and that was... You should go to Tasmania.
Yeah, I want to do that. I've been saying to Steve that we should do it. It'd be a great thing to do. All right, Stewart, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with all the listeners.
No worries, Michael. Thank you for having me on.
No, it's been great. And just learning about that import process, something I'm always thinking about. And sometimes it feels a bit scary if you haven't done it before. But, like your knowledge and your experience with it, I think will help, the people in Australia who are sort of like on the fence whether they should do it or they shouldn't do it.
Yeah, look, it was fine. You've got to do your research. And the last thing to add is these days you've got to make sure you get your asbestos checks sorted, but your shipper will help you with that.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Stewart.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, everyone. That's PorscheCooled Owners Stories number 40, and that's with Stewart coming in from Australia, from Melbourne, with his Iris Blue 85 Carrera 3.2 coupe that he imported from the US. And that's about it today. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.